Adnan Syed's name has come up in the news again recently with reports that the state of Maryland is granting him a retrial on the original 1999 conviction against him for the murder of Hae Min Lee. So what happened? Why did they reconsider? Well, Serial happened. 2014. Baltimore Sun reporter Sarah Koenig receives an email from Rabia Chowdhury asking her to consider investigating the possible mishandling of a murder case against Adnan Syed. So Sarah looks into the case, and notices quite a bit of information that Adnan's attorney neglected to present at the trial. As Sarah continues to look into it, she finds a lot of information that, in the end, leads her to believe that there is reasonable doubt that Adnan could have been innocent.
If you asked me to swear that Adnan Syed is innocent, I couldn't do it. I nurse doubt. I don't like that I do, but I do. I mean, most of the time, I think he didn't do it.
This is a clip from the final episode of the series. So this is Sarah's final verdict on Adnan's case, a case that, because of this podcast, has become one of the world's latest fascinations. My issue with this is about how clearly this podcast is meant to entice further listening.
There are parts of Jay's story that make no sense, where it seems like there must have been more going on than he's saying. But here's what's also the truth. You can say the same thing about Adnan's story, too. Next time on Serial.
What? And based on Sarah's final verdict, it seems that she has doubt based on what she knows, but she feels like Adnan couldn't do it.
My interest in it, honestly, has been you. Like, you're a really nice guy. Like, I like talking to you, you know? So then it's kind of like this question of, well, what does that mean?
It means nothing. In my opinion, how charming someone may or may not be should not be used as any evidence to potentially let a killer loose. I mean, think about the O.J. Simpson case. There's no question how charming he was, and that seemed to be a large factor in finding him innocent.
Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A.
Sarah spends much time dwelling on witness accounts of the emotions that Adnan was feeling at the time of the murder. Actually, an entire episode is devoted to it.
That Adnan appeared to be in denial when they all first heard what had happened. That he said things like, it's not her, they've got the wrong person.
While at the same time, there are accounts of people claiming Adnan's guilt just by their accounts of his mental health.
That was the woman who said she thought Adnan was faking his reaction after Hae's death.
There's so much confusion about how to feel about Adnan's case that I have to leave out anything that could have any emotional discrepancy. Sounds easy, right? Well, it's actually kind of crazy just how much of the evidence can go either way. But here's what I have. 1. Hae's car. A lot of people complain about how Jay's testimony is what the case is built on. But it seems that people are neglecting to factor in the idea that Jay led the police to Hae's car. How would he know where that car would be if he wasn't involved? You could bring up the argument that it could have been Jay who murdered Hae, but you have no motive or evidence to prove why or even how he could do that. 2. The Nisha call. Okay, the Nisha call, think about the chances of that actually being a butt dial. The opposing argument that I hear most often is that it's still possible. Sure, it's possible. But it's almost just as likely that Hae was murdered by some random serial killer. So if the Nisha call wasn't a butt dial, you have people already corroborating that there was one anyway, which then places Jay and Adnan at the Best Buy location in the time frame that the prosecution states that Hae was murdered. If we look even more into the cell tower records, we see that most everything that Jay claims to be true works out with the call logs. So you can't really make a he said, she said argument because his he said story is at least mirrored in the call logs. Now this could be some sort of perfect plan for the Maryland Police Department to frame Adnan Syed, but it seems a bit far-fetched, especially when you factor in Jim Trainum's expert opinion that the case was run pretty well. He says,
I always said that this is better than average. The mechanics, the documentation, the steps that they took, and all of that, they look good, okay?
Something that I'm not completely sold on is the idea of intent when talking about alleged quotes from Adnan regarding his planning of Hae's murder. Lines like, "I'm gonna kill that bitch,"
Language!
which Adnan supposedly told Jay at the grocery store, and "going to kill" on a note that Adnan and Aisha were passing back and forth. The idea of these lines do not seem to have any amiable intent. People often bring up the idea of saying, "I'm gonna kill you, dude," jokingly. But the difference is that "I'm gonna kill that bitch"
Language!
and "going to kill," which is written word, so that's kind of impossible to interpret context-wise. So I don't understand how that could be seen as joking rhetoric. Lastly, and something that I find most interesting, something people often say, or at least in Miss Koenig's case, is that Adnan couldn't possibly have done it because he's such a nice guy. I've heard the argument that if he is guilty, then why wouldn't he just give up his story after 20 years like OJ did?
And I said, "Well, you think you can kick my ass?" And I remember I grabbed a knife. I do remember that portion, taking the knife from Charlie. And to be honest, after that, I don't remember.
Well, there's often a coping mechanism in cases like this. It's called self-deception. The Behavioral and Brain Sciences Division at Cambridge University defines self-deception as this after conducting an experiment about self-deception: to facilitate interpersonal deception by allowing people to avoid the cues to conscious deception that might reveal deceptive intent. That's basically stating that self-deception could be used to make oneself believe their own lie, so one could be a more confident and less detectable liar. Well, let's dig a little deeper into the actual mechanics of this concept. Well, in section 5.3 from that abstract, it says this: even if people attend to unwanted information, and even if they keep it at the time of encoding, this does not guarantee that they will be able to retrieve it later. Rather, information that is inconsistent with their preferences may simply be forgotten or misremembered later as preference consistent or neutral. That would make sense, especially because of Adnan's lack of recollection of that entire day as a whole. Let's check another source, see if they echo Cambridge's research. Well, because let's just face it, I'm not really sure how reputable a source Cambridge is. How about Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, cognitive psychology graduate of Stanford? She's an expert in human memory and has literally written the book on repressed memory. She also wrote a book literally about the pitfalls of using memory in court, but let's just stick with this. She says,
many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true.
That seems to echo the same ideas. It seems to be bringing up the fluidity of memories as a whole, which is helpful in the case against Adnan, as well as Jay's case, when claiming he's lying just because his story changes with how he reacts to cops asking him questions. Well, okay, but I'm not exactly an expert on this. I haven't studied this for, I would say, more than a week. So let's find someone who can echo that this applies to Adnan. How about someone with a UCLA degree in developmental psychology? Tani Tsang connects this case to the idea of memory's unreliability here. Adnan adamantly holds on to his innocence just as strongly as others claim that he committed the crime. Koenig mentions several times that someone is lying, but the issues surrounding memory, not to mention the selectivity of memory, make it impossible to accurately reconstruct the events. When looking at all of this, there's no way for me to understand what else there could possibly be to point me in the direction of Adnan's innocence. So this might be an unsatisfying inclusion, Serial, but sorry, Sarah. It seems to me that your year of investigation has only led to further evidence that the state was right in its original conviction. In other words, he did it. Or not! Next time on Serial.